How is a country really made? Does it just pop into existence one day? Or is it something that's forged over thousands of years? Well, the story of Canada, it starts with ice, it's hammered out by conflict, and honestly, it's a story that's still being written. So let's dive into that journey together. All right, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at the First Peoples. Then we'll get into the arrival of Europeans and the massive battle for a continent that followed. After that, we'll see how a new dominion is born, and finally, we'll cover the last steps from colony to nation. Okay, so first things first, if you really want to get Canada, you've got to rewind the clock. I'm talking way back, long before any European ships ever showed up. For millennia, this land was already bustling with its own vibrant and really complex societies. And believe it or not, the story starts with geology, with ice. You're looking at the massive Laurentide ice sheet. As this giant thing started to melt, maybe 16,000 years ago, it literally opened up pathways. This allowed the very first people to travel south and east from Beringia, spreading out and populating an entire continent. And what's just mind-boggling is the sheer amount of time we're talking about here. This pre-contact history is huge. You can see this incredible evolution, right? You start with the Paleo-Indian period with Ice Age hunters. Then you move into the Archaic period, where the climate gets more stable and people adapt to their local environments. And then comes the Woodland period. This was a game changer because pottery shows up. Think about it. That totally changes how you can store food and build more permanent communities. And this is so important to get. It wasn't just one single culture. No way. The land was a patchwork, a mosaic of all these different societies. Take the Hopewellian peoples, for example. They built these massive trade networks that stretched for incredible distances. And you can actually see the evidence of this in these distinct cultural centers, like the Laurel and Sajun complexes right around the Great Lakes. It shows you just how connected their world really was. And that diversity, you see it in the languages too. Before Europeans arrived, the continent was just a tapestry of different language families. I mean, you had the Algonquian languages spoken all across the east, and then you had the Na-Dene languages way up in the northwest, and each one of those represents a totally unique way of seeing the world. So, into this world sails something new. The arrival of Europeans marks a profound turning point, kicking off a new chapter that would completely reshape the continent's destiny. But the very first Europeans weren't who you might be thinking of. It was the Norse. Around the year 1000, they set up a small settlement right here at what's now Lanzo Meadows in Newfoundland. It didn't last long, but to this day, it's the only confirmed Norse site in all of North America, outside of Greenland. Okay, let's fast forward about 500 years, because that's when the two major players show up on the scene. First, in 1497, you've got John Cabot, who lands and claims territory for England. But they don't really follow up with a permanent colony. Then, in 1534, Jacques Cartier sails in, claims the region for France, naming it Canada, by the way, and that claim eventually leads to the first permanent French settlement in Quebec City in 1608. Now, the early French explorers like Cartier and later Samuel de Champlain, they didn't just stick a flag in the ground. They pushed deep into the interior, sailing up the St. Lawrence River. And crucially, they started building relationships, trade relationships and alliances, with the First Nations they encountered. So you've got Britain and France, both with a foothold in this new world. A collision was pretty much inevitable, right? North America was about to become the main stage for a huge, century-long struggle between two of Europe's biggest empires. This map from 1702 really lays out the problem. Look at those huge overlapping territories. France is in blue, England is in pink. They both claimed the same land, wanted the same resources, and were desperate for control over the incredibly valuable fur trade. Conflict wasn't just possible, it was guaranteed. And this imperial rivalry just blew up into a whole series of really brutal conflicts that we call the French and Indian Wars. For nearly 75 years, these two powers went at it, fighting for total dominance. And they did it with the help of their indigenous allies, whose knowledge of the land was absolutely essential. It all came to a head in one final, decisive conflict, the 7 Years' War. And the human cost of all this fighting was just immense. One of the most heartbreaking parts of this story was the British expulsion of the Acadians. Starting in 1755, about 12,000 French-speaking settlers were just forcibly torn from their homes in the Maritimes. The end finally came with the Treaty of Paris in 1763. After winning huge battles at Quebec City and Montreal, Britain was the clear victor. France had to give up almost its entire North American empire. And just like that, the map of the continent was redrawn. It was now almost entirely under British control. I mean, the entire political and cultural landscape of North America was changed forever. For the French Empire, a dream was over. And for the British, a brand new imperial reality was just beginning. So out of the embers of that imperial war, a totally new idea started to take hold in the British colonies that were left. The idea of forming their own country. And then, on July 1st, 1867, it happened. That idea became a reality. 3 separate British colonies, the province of Canada, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia, joined together through Confederation. They created a new, self-governing entity, and its official name was Canada. But what did that actually mean? Well, Canada was given the title of Dominion, and this is the key part. It meant Canada could handle its own internal business, but Great Britain still called the shots on its foreign policy. So it was a country, but not a fully independent one. Not yet.
That last part of the journey, going from a self-governing colony to a truly sovereign nation, well, that was a much slower process. It would actually take another century to fully complete.
Yeah, this road to full independence was definitely a marathon, not a sprint. After Confederation in '67, the next huge leap forward was the Statute of Westminster in 1931, which basically recognized Canada as an equal to Britain. The country kept growing too, with Newfoundland finally joining the party in 1949. But the real finish line was crossed in 1982. That's when the Constitution was patriated, which is a fancy way of saying Canada finally had full control over its own laws, cutting that last legal cord to the British Parliament. So from ancient peoples adapting to a new world after the Ice Age, to warring empires, and finally a peaceful walk to independence, the story of Canada is all about layers. And it leaves us with one big question to think about. How does a nation's long and messy history, a history of Indigenous heritage, French roots, British roots, and wave after wave of immigration, continue to shape who it is today?